Hello, everybody. Welcome. Isaac Asimov has a great short story that he published in 1976 called The Bicentennial Man, which you may be more familiar with the really, really terrible movie that was made of it. But in it, the robot Andrew astonishes his owner because he produces the most remarkably beautiful wood carvings. A bit more recently, in 2015, Neil Blomkamp's wonderful film Chappie has an AI who starts to learn, and part of his learning journey is learning how to paint. If these stories are to be believed, creativity is what defines us as human, and if it shows that it has it, defines AI as more than machine. But can AI actually be creative, or can it only appear to be so? Why might we want AI to be creative? And what consequences does or could this have, ranging from the philosophical to the technological? And of course, we need to start by figuring out what we mean by creativity anyway. So to help me explore these questions today, I'm delighted to welcome my three panelists. Dennis Mortensen, you've already heard from, is CEO and co-founder of X.ai. We're also joined by David Hanson, CEO and founder of Hanson Robotics, and Professor Maggie Boden, who's a research professor of cognitive science at the University of Sussex and author of The Creative Mind, Myths and Mechanisms. Can we have a round of applause for my panelists, please? And one other thing to draw your attention to before we start the discussion is that I have built a little bit of creative interactivity into this session. So if you wish to take part in this, which will be sprung on you and the panelists at various moments, do get your Slido app up and running on your phone, and you'll see why as we progress. Lovely, thank you very much for coming and joining me today. Maggie, I'd like to start with you. I'm a philosopher by training, so I like to define my terms. So what do we mean by creativity?
I think creativity is the ability to come up with ideas in art or science or joking or engineering, which are new, surprising, and valuable. And as far as AI is concerned, the problem is not the new, the problem is the valuable.
Do we have any competing definitions of creativity?
I'll buy that. I think if I were to underline anything for where we're certainly very much on the same page, new is very doable, as in something we can imagine. I think the valuable part is extremely difficult to the point of potentially impossible, certainly for machines alone to figure out whether it's valuable or not.
I think of creativity fundamentally as the existence of new patterns that have some kind of effect. And so the valuable aspect would be defined in a given context. And you could say that, Darwin's natural evolution and the very rules of physics and mathematics would be creative because it generated human beings who are generating valuable things. And you have emergence in nature. So are the seeds of creativity in emergence, or are they in a human-like imagination which can guide the creative process towards a specific useful end to the advantage of humans or some other goal that humans might set? Or is the latter perhaps a more elaborate and complex version of the former, of the physical, mathematical emergence that you have with complexity mathematics?
Well, I would say there's no such thing as the creative process. I would say, there are at least 3 different sorts of creativity, and I think they offer different opportunities and different problems for AI. And one is the one that people always recognize or nearly always mention in their definitions, although neither of you did, but mostly people do, namely putting familiar ideas together in unfamiliar ways. And many, many examples of creativity are certainly like that. And I mean, even I could probably write a line of code that would do that, get a computer to do that. Making new combinations is not the problem. The problem is making new combinations which we will find interesting or valuable in some way. And of course, the criteria we use will be very different if we're talking about mathematics, or if we're talking about music, or if we're talking about puppetry. So there are all sorts of values that we use, and they change, of course. They change overnight. If you're involved in the fashion industry, you know that very well. So that's combinational creativity, and as I say, the newness is not difficult for AI, but the value is. The second sort of creativity is what I call exploratory creativity, and that, in principle, is much the most possible for AI, because in exploratory creativity, you start out with a style of thinking, and maybe how to paint, maybe how to write a fugue, whatever. You start out with a style of thinking which is already valued in your community, and you suss out what the rules are, what the constraints are, and you generate new structures within that space. And that's something which AI can do, and that's something which, for example, was responsible for the AlphaGo amazing achievement in terms of comparing the achievement of the AI program with human Go players. So exploratory creativity, we know what the values are, and we manage to somehow build them into the system, and then it follows them, so it's less problematic. But the third sort, and this perhaps, it relates to what you said, is what I call transformational creativity, where you actually change one or more of the rules that define the space so that you can now generate things which were impossible to generate before. And of course, evolutionary AI does precisely that. But the problem with that is, again, that the fitness function, if you like, the value, the judgments of value which are made, by definition, the old ones won't quite do because you've changed the rules. So a decision has to be made about whether or not the newly transformed structures are valuable. And in general, at the moment certainly, a human being has to do that. We don't know how to get the AI to do it because we aren't clear enough about the values that we're using to put them into the system.
And just to kind of latch on to your comment on the whole Google Go endeavor, which was indeed extremely impressive. But if you all seen the movie or the commentary or read the papers, those specific moves that we looked at a later point and kind of suggested were creative in their own right, that was not a machine that defined them as creative or as some sort of output post-game for where here are the three kind of moves I made that I'm especially proud of. That was us looking at the moves and then determining that those particular moves we found to be creative in their own right. And even the application, I'm not sure, would have been able to kind of pinpoint that had it played another million games. Had we not looked at them, they would have disappeared and we would have had no idea.
So does it matter if the AI doesn't know that it's being creative? Are you saying that it's the human that would designate something as creative or not?
What I'm saying is, I'm latching on to creating something new. That could be a random set of pixels, or that could be some theme of some image extracted from it and learned what that is, whatever you want to pick up on, and apply that to another set of images, and they're certainly new, as in they didn't exist before. I'm not so sure that I immediately latch on to a belief that they are now coming out of a creative system. And whenever we look at something and I want to apply some sort of creative attribute to it, many times I'm the one who applies the creative attribute, not the system itself. It's not that the system did 1 million images, and out of those 1 million images, I picked 4 that I think are particularly creative. It did not.
David, do you think it can be creative, or do you think that's just how we're perceiving it?
Well, I think creativity in so many ways probably comes from very many angles. at the same time, you may be able to classify it in many ways. It would appear that human creativity combines some unconscious processes, like that would be related to dreaming, and yet also some reasoned, motivated, conscious processes where you're having the observer self-aware, aware of oneself in a particular context, trying to achieve a particular goal, somehow feeling this desire to achieve a particular valuable output. And even if it's an unconscious desire, when you see it, you're like, wow, that's cool. I now suddenly I have this great leap. I can see this thing that has happened in a broad new context that can change the world. So then consciousness seems to have many aspects too in the human mind, related not just to the prefrontal cortex. Yes, it involves the prefrontal cortex, but also the anterior cingulate sulcus and the phi, the system resonance and coordination. And all of these things may be related to human-level creativity in the sense of the Hofstadter strange loopiness of creativity, where he creates this beautiful argument about how all these kinds of loops are necessary for consciousness and creativity. Gödel, Escherbach, and Arturo Golden Braid, beautiful, beautiful book about the mysteries of creativity. Well, if it requires getting these physical systems in this particular configuration where you have a certain level of conscious observation, maybe that goes, beyond a basket weaver bird, which is, you could argue, would be creative, but not like a human, or natural selection. Darwinian natural selection is kind of creative, but not like a human solving a problem like this. There are particular neural architectural features that are strongly correlated with human creativity and also the highest levels of human intellect. And that creativity combined with intellect is a powerful combination. That's where almost every act that we might consider to be genius would spring from, this set of architectural features. Well, we only see that occur one place in the universe that we know of, and that is the human being. Maybe an octopus is creative in some way or another that we don't understand fully. Certainly animals and creatures, our organisms, show signs of creativity. Well, if this is true, maybe what we need to do is look at whole organism architectures for artificial intelligence, where we start putting these things together. And we don't know if, maybe it requires quantum loop gravity and some kind of quantum computing like Penrose. We don't know, but if we put a toolkit together where we can start to experiment at this highest level, maybe the machines can be creative. We don't know until we play.
Right, well, that's a good cue. I think we will play for the first time. So Adam, could I get the first slide up, please? Adam's actually human, not AI. Right, so this is a game. Can AI be creative? Let's find out what you think. So next slide. Okay, so we've got two riddles, riddle A and riddle B. Riddle A, what's the difference between a pretty glove and a silent cat? One is a cute mitten, the other is a mute kitten. And riddle B, what geometric figure is like a lost parrot? A polygon. So if you've got Slido up, can you answer either A or B to which one you think of these was created by an AI? If you don't have Slido, we can do it the human way and you can stick your hand up in the air. So who thinks that A was created by an AI? Okay, and who thinks that B was? Right, and the answer, so most of you think, it's changing. People can't decide. Live increasing. It's neck and neck, it's like a horse race. Oh, no, that can't be true. We can't have an actual 50-50 split. Goodness me, that's almost statistically impossible that we could have predicted that. Right, so that's brilliant. We don't know. Is it still changing? No, people changing their mind. Right, the answer is A was the riddle created by an AI. It was the Jape riddle generator, which was created by Binstead and Ritchie in the 1990s. Riddle B is one of my son's favorite maths jokes. Okay, brilliant. Right, we've got a few more of those coming up as we go through. What I wanted to move on to is a kind of thinking about the practical applications of AI creativity. So Dennis, why might we want AI to be, or need AI to be creative?
I certainly believe, naively perhaps, that it's almost inevitable that we'll move into some software paradigm for where the kind of UIs we know today will disappear and we'll deal with a set of agents. We can talk about exactly how we'll deal with those agents, but I just can't see that not happen. And if we start to deal with these agents, I think there'll be suddenly a set of expectations from us as consumers to what they do for us, which is going to be different to what we expect our software applications to do for us today. And today it's very much question-answer systems. Have some question to some piece of software, you provide some sort of answer or action, and I'm happy about that because otherwise it will take too long to do by hand or couldn't do it at all by hand. But in this new setting for where these machines will kind of cooperate or be part of a team, we will expect some level of, I'm not sure I'm bought into the idea of creativity, but certainly common sense is perhaps the best moniker I've been able to kind of apply to it. And we can certainly see that in our very finite universe of meeting scheduling, which is such a tiny part of the whole universe that it seems almost not worth attacking. But there you have 120 plus people trying to figure that out. But even in that tiny universe, there's expectations for where if I describe something in natural language, you can pick up not just on the words themselves, but behind the words, what I want you to do. Set something up with you next week, or set something up upon my return, which is not even a temporal expression. It's just you trying to say, I want to meet up with you, but I'm somewhere else, but I might come back, and when I do come back, we should meet up. And I think that level of common sense, that will just be expected for this kind of future, which I certainly imagine happening. And if we don't solve that, I think we might fail at it.
I wouldn't be at all surprised if we don't solve it, ever, in the general case. I mean, it's a sort of the general version of the frame problem. Now, some people say the frame problem has been solved for AI. It's nonsense, it hasn't. It has been solved for certain areas in maths and science, where you can, and engineering, where you can express the problem, clearly enough, and the possible outcomes and the possible faults clearly enough that you can handle with them, you can anticipate them and handle them. But in the general case, the frame problem raises, if you like, what I would call the issue of relevance, and what humans regard as relevant in any particular case, including your meetings case, and can I get home afterwards at a reasonable time, and all that. I mean, that's really open-ended. And I think you have to be, a member of a certain culture to appreciate the sorts of things that are regarded as relevant in that culture. And I think you have to be someone who understands the human condition, who is a human being, for certain other sorts of relevance, to be understood and to matter. And I just don't think that those issues will be fundamentally solved by AI, despite all the hype that there is about it at the moment. I think it's really misconceived.
David, Dennis, sorry, go ahead.
Given I've made a 4.5-year-long bet on being able to solve some parts of it, I'm obviously heavily biased. But I certainly don't have any expectation, or I can't imagine some press release from our friends at Google at some point in the not too distant future that rhymes with, ta-da, we solved it. Whatever question you have, we'll have an answer to it, or whatever job you can describe, we'll be able to perform that job. That seems, and I think we're very much on the same page there, almost unrealistic to me. And certainly as an engineer, and I just can't even imagine the setup. Now, being able to carve out a small part of the universe and describe that in full so that you can navigate it certainly seems feasible, or that's the bet which I'm making here. The universe is large, though, and being able to describe all parts and how they're connected, again, brings me back to, I'm not sure I'm sold on that happening. but I can certainly imagine certain pockets here and there being elements that you can define. And if you really asked me about what we spent the most time on, which was defining this universe, and plenty of my entrepreneur friends will kind of work at Morgan Stanley, believe they need to be entrepreneurs, download TensorFlow on Friday, and think they can be up and running on Tuesday. As in, we spent years on end doing no code, just trying to describe a universe, which certainly I'm sure to you seems fairly simple, as in how many things can happen in the meeting scheduling universe. That seems somewhat definable. And for us, that's been a almost impossible task.
David, where do you stand? Are you Team Dennis or Team Maggie?
Well, I stand on the principle of aspiration, that we know that there's a vast body of mystery. We don't know how the human mind works or the human body. We don't know how many dimensions exist in the universe. We've got working theories for these things and some conjectures, reasonable conjectures about what may be solvable or not solvable and what tools might be required to solve these problems. However, if we assume that it can't be solved, then really the chance of solving these problems rapidly diminishes to zero. So if we assume that they can be solved, then we can start to ask these creative questions. How may it be solved? We do know that the human imagination seems to be limited, and it requires a lot of work, creative work, to unlock the mysteries that we have. So we don't have, surely doesn't seem like that we have, some kind of omniscient and omnipotent creativity. It might be that the universe can be more creative than us in some ways. And maybe as we're unlocking all of these mysteries of bioscience and physics, we can unlock some of the physical mysteries of the human mind and the human creativity. And what's interesting is that these kind of small cases and toy cases that have taken a lot of work to yield real results haven't plateaued. We haven't stopped. Now, that doesn't mean that we can solve the hard problems of transformational creativity or the hard problems of consciousness, but it is tantalizing. It teases us to keep trying, to keep questing, to unlock these mysteries, and maybe we will. We don't know when that would happen, and we can make arbitrary predictions tomorrow, 10 years, 100 years, never. But almost certainly, our understanding is too limited to accurately predict, which means that it is possible. It may be possible. It may be possible. And so then, if we use the power, like for me, I think of the power of creativity as not just the power of reasoning, not just the power of combinatorics, but the power of dreaming. And there's mystery there. We don't know how dreams work exactly. We sort of say, okay, deep dreaming and convolutional neural networks produces these beautiful results, but it's not the same as humans dreaming. And so we see these dreams in this theoretical science, which is kind of a philosophical exploration of science fiction. A lot of what happens in science fiction inspires the quest of scientists, but also even those scientists who aren't inspired by science fiction. They often have to come up with a novel model, a framework, this transformational leap. Where does that come from? This power of imagination. Well, that power applied to imagining the future, sometimes it seems almost precognition, prescient. I'm not saying that it's any kind of spookiness, any sort of not anything based on physics or math, but what I'm saying is the power of imagination to see something big. Well, in science fiction, we see these things like thinking creative machines, and those inspire us. And I am actually, my whole undertaking in life is taking all these different creative disciplines and putting them together to make these robots into physically embodied science fiction. Meaning like cinema is science fiction, video games can be science fiction, written word can be science fiction, right? Well, why not AI and robotics? We craft those things together, and it's, in a sense, it's real AI, as in like some of the state-of-the-art, state-of-the-technique algorithms and, you know, glued together. It's a research platform. But then using them to create things like the Android portrait of Philip K. Dick, taking the corpora of his writing and training this with statistical machine learning, this natural language generator that can then create things in the style of Philip K. Dick. It's like a ghost, a living ghost of Philip K. Dick. People would sit and have a conversation. They would swear there was a ghost in that machine, but it really there wasn't. But it enlivened, perhaps, I hope, people to dream of a future where machines might be as creative, insightful as the genius of Philip K. Dick.
That's lovely because Philip K. Dick, of course, inspired my little test today because of the Voigtkamp test in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. So could we get our poetry slide up? I don't have a dream for you, but I do have 2 poems for you. Speakers, you can see it down on the screen at your feet if you don't want to turn around. So I'm not going to read the poems in their entirety. It's quicker if you do that in your head. The first 2 lines. So poem A home transformed by the lightning, the balanced alcoves smother this insatiable earth of a planet Earth. Poem B, the night brings another distance, larks from the razzle about being, bombarded with each picture skip and something wonderfully frozen. So same question, which poem was written by an AI? Which poem was written by a human? So if you think that poem A was written by an AI, choose poem A. If you think that poem B was written by an AI, choose poem B. Those on Slido can do it. We can have some hands as well. Was poem A written by an AI? Okay, not so many. Was poem B written by an AI? Okay, overwhelming hands for poem B. Slido is in support as well, although poem A is creeping up, but that looks pretty conclusive and is entirely wrong. Poem B is in fact written by a colleague of mine in the Faculty of English at the University of Cambridge and is characteristic of the Cambridge School of Avant-Garde Poetry. Poem A was written by a computer program in 2010 designed by Duke University undergraduate Zachary Scholl and was submitted to the Duke Literary Journal, The Archive, who accepted it and published it. Zachary was so embarrassed for his poor literary editors that it was many years before he actually revealed to them that he was not the author of the poem, but in fact the AI was. Brilliant. Okay, we've got 1 more of those coming up, but before we do, Maggie, we've talked about, sort of in general, about how a creative AI might be useful in a kind of business sense. I'm curious about how it might function in a creative industries sense. So the Royal Society did a very interesting study of machine learning and found that the UK public was quite willing to accept AI in areas like medicine and insurance, but very disturbed by the idea that AI might produce music or poetry or literature or film. So Maggie, do you think that there's a benefit to AI moving into those realms, or do we need to preserve those as exclusively human?
Well, it's certainly not exclusively human. I mean, there are many people, well, many is perhaps over-egging the pudding. There are an increasing number of people who are professional computer artists, where they don't just use computers, you know, in the way that David Hockney does. I don't regard David Hockney, despite his recent work, as a computer artist. He's just using computers to do stuff which, you know, he could have done otherwise. It's just easier to do it with the computer. But people like William Latham, Ernest Edmonds, John McCormack, people like that, they are all doing computer art which they could not have done, could not even have imagined without the computer. And they regard the results as aesthetically valuable. Now, I mean, you as an individual may or may not in any particular case, but that's the case with art anyway. So people who are as I say, professionally engaged in the creative arts, certainly if they're involved with graphics or to a lesser extent, but still with music, then I think, yes, they are increasingly using AI and benefiting from it. Literature is another matter, whether we're talking about poems or whether we're talking about novels and, prose texts of any length. That's far more difficult. It's far more challenging for various reasons, including the relevance issues I was talking about earlier. So natural language is a huge problem here. But don't forget that with a poem, even if it isn't a haiku, we're prepared to put a lot more of our own imagination into the interpretation, into giving it meaning, projecting meaning onto it, than we are with a piece of prose. So yes, they've got a place there, but that's a very interesting question. How large that place will end up being.
I'm going to add a little dystopian tone to proceedings as we draw to the close. Are there any reasons why we might be worried about AI being creative? Or any areas where we really wouldn't want it to be? David?
Two areas that would concern me. One is in the area of weapons of mass persuasion and deep fakery. Deep fakes that wind up deluding people and decreasing the accessibility to the truth and freedom and opportunities for actualization, making us pawns in an increasingly sophisticated power game among corporations and national interests. And the second area of concern, well, first, I'd like to say that if we could get algorithms to be more creative in pursuit of truth, this isn't ideal more than anything, but like weeding out, the kind of prejudice and bias out of data sets and algorithms is, in a sense, in a narrow sense, about pursuing more truth and getting noise out of the data. So there's a kind of arms race between those in pursuit of AI for truth and those in pursuit of AI for manipulation. The second way that may be even more concerning is the stuff of speculation and science fiction. Let us just imagine, though, that we could create a machine that is not just super intelligent, but super creative, able to outmaneuver humans in any game that we might play in our real world. And it doesn't require a universal scale creative intelligence. It just has to be smarter than people in some sense.
Okay,
and if it doesn't share our values, then it could be scary.
Right, I don't want to end on a totally scary note. So final slide, our picture slide. Adam is going to be up in a moment, I hope. Yeah, there we go. Okay, which one was created by an AI? Painting A or painting B? Slido and Hans, painting A? Okay, painting B? That's closer than our poems were. Slido's obviously taking a little bit more time. Okay. Well, you guys have ended on a high note. Painting B is indeed the one created by the AI. Painting A is actually Paul Gauguin's Tahiti and Picnics. I hope that has given you some creative food for thought. If you wish to meet the speakers afterwards, please congregate towards the back of the hall, and a lady or gentleman with a blue lollipop will take you down to the Meet the Speaker room. In the meantime, please thank my panelists for a wonderful discussion. Really good.